Stanford University.
It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Philippe Golden, who is a research scientist at Stanford University. He's a clinical psychologist as well as the director of the clinically applied affective neuroscience laboratory. And that applied affective neuroscience means really trying to understand what's happening in the brain when we experience emotions as well as psychological disorders like anxiety, and can we apply our knowledge about how the brain works to relieve suffering. And that's some of what you're going to hear about today. And Philippe is also the clinical director of research for the Center for Compassion and Altruism. And some of you have actually participated in a study with the Center for Compassion and Altruism, and Dr. Golden is one of the many people who is helping to send you those emails and those instruments that you were answering on a daily basis. Before he became a clinical psychologist and a researcher, Dr. Golden spent, 6 years in India and Nepal in monasteries studying Buddhist philosophy and contemplative practices and languages, and was a translator for several Tibetan lamas. And so we're going to hear a little bit more today about that integration between Western psychology and neuroscience and these contemplative traditions and philosophies. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Golden.
Well, I'm already very impressed that you could do that without any notes and so forth. So we go way back. We're good friends. And I know that you're in very good hands. So first of all, can you hear me? In the back, in the front? Great. I will speak loudly, clearly. So what I'm going to do today in our short time together, and first of all, I'm very happy to be here. I think it's really a lot of fun. Obviously, I'm going to talk about some of our research in our lab on meditation, specific kinds of meditation, anxiety disorders, attention, brain. But with your consent, I will also do this interactively. And specifically what I mean by that is I'm going to guide you through a few short contemplations that are related to some of the clinical and brain data that we will look at and explore together. So here we go. Let's do it. So the motivation here, and it's very important to start with motivation, is that obviously on the left, we can all recognize this. Moments when we feel angst, stressed, pressure, insecure, self-doubt, and this is just a part of the human experience. So the question is, how do we transform from the image on the left to the image on the right, where we feel a sense of creativity, lightness of being, innovative, connected with others? And that's pretty much the punchline of this whole thing, this whole program and quest, is how do we reduce these different flavors of suffering, confusion, pain, angst, and arrive at a place where we're more dynamic and awake and balanced. So much of the work in our group is really, you could call translational clinical neuroscience. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, also trained as a neuroscientist. And I must say, the moment that I became happy in academia, because graduate school, as many of you can attest, is a time with a lot of anxiety, depression, self-doubt, etc., is when I brought things that I absolutely love: brain, physics, brain imaging, clinical treatment, meditation, psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. So the idea here is essentially, can we begin to explore the brain mechanisms that support who we are, how we think, feel, pay attention, regulate our emotions, etc. Here, in the context of anxiety disorders, which are incredibly prevalent, both clinical diagnosed and also subclinical. And here, looking at the methods of one technique, which is meditation as a method for training the mind. And there are many forms of meditation. We'll get to that later. With the motivation to really understand the sources of suffering and to help people learn skills to reduce their suffering. So already I'm going to ask you to participate. So what I'd like you to do is just put your hands down, put your pens down, take a position of dignity in your own body, mind, right this moment, however that manifests in you. Just relax the muscles in the face, the neck, the shoulders. Find your breath. Bring your attention gradually to the sensation of your own breath. No need to control or change how you are breathing. You can have your eyes open or closed, but let your attention settle on the sensations that you experience with each inhalation and each exhalation as you breathe in and breathe out. Simply noticing the quality of your attention. Noticing when your mind drifts, bringing it back, when it's more focused, when it's more fuzzy. Simply noticing your own breath experience. Your own body and mind is the research laboratory. So in a moment, I'm going to speak certain sentences, beliefs, and I simply want you, as a scientist, right this moment, to notice what you feel in your body and mind as I speak. I'm not okay the way I am. If other people really knew me, they would not like me. I am flawed. I'm unlovable. Will this ever change? Simply notice any subtle or gross reactivity in your sensation, your body, your thoughts, your breath. And now, as an inverse of that, simply relax your face, your muscles. Relax your mind. Simply release right this moment. And notice what that feels like in your own body-mind. Simple release. And now take 3 deep breaths and open your eyes. Okay. So throughout the day, our minds are fluctuating between many, many different mental states, and we'll talk about a few of them today. But here, essentially, there are times that the mind, my mind, is like a fly attracted to something sweet, and my feet get stuck on the honey. The sticky mind, the monkey mind, the sticky mind. And the idea is there are other states throughout the day where maybe, hopefully, you feel a sense of fluidity. You feel a sense of release. There are some people who feel and who experience that cascading of negative, self-judgmental, self-critical thoughts, the inner critic, all the time. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and having, I am not okay the way I am. There's something totally wrong with me. I will never be loved. I'm not worthy of love. There are some people who experience that all day long. That totally sucks. It does. But the other thing we have to recognize, and this is going to be a theme for tonight, is that there are other mental states. And we do, all of us, have had moments of lightness of being, clarity, feeling loved, connected. And the question is, and I would say that that's the whole program of psychology, how do we get from there to here? Well, we'll do a little bit of practice today. Another practice, okay? In the spirit of the science. So again, you can have your eyes open or you can close your eyes, and I'm going to guide you through another quality of the mind. And simply, as a scientist, right now, in your seat, notice your own research laboratory, your own body-mind. So again, bring the mind and the attention to just rest on the experience of your own breath as you breathe in and as you breathe out. No right or wrong, simply noticing the sensations inside the nostrils as you breathe in and breathe out. And now I'd like you to shift to, what do I need to do tomorrow? Who do I need to call? What email do I need to respond to? The mind is beginning to wander, future tripping, spinning on things that you have to do. And notice what it feels like for the mind to be pulled in that manner. And now bring your attention back to your breath, anchoring your attention on the breath. And I would like you to feel a sense of heaviness, fatigue, tiredness, fatigue in your body, lethargy, heaviness. Notice what that feels like. Now bring your attention back to your breath. And now take a deep, deep, deep breath and open your eyes. One of the great gurus of attention research, Michael Posner, up in Oregon, he and his team have actually worked out a really interesting model that I think is very helpful in trying to understand where is our mind shifting from moment to moment throughout the day. And this green bar in the center is where we want to be. And it behooves each of us to become incredibly familiar in our own body-mind with what does it feel like when I have a dynamic, balanced state of attention. Optimal. To pay attention to someone who I'm talking to, pay attention to cars, pay attention to lights, sounds, etc. And when is my mind shifting into wandering mind, future tripping, past tripping, I call it soap opera mode? Or when am I really shifting into fatigue, tiredness? And this is basically the whole practice. When am I imbalanced? And what does it feel like to be dynamically, optimally focused? So there are ways of training this. And I would suggest that paying attention, and you can just think about what it feels like when you're speaking about something important to you and someone pays attention genuinely, or they start drifting. I would suggest that paying attention is compassion. Paying attention is compassion. We know from brain science that paying attention, and I'm pointing right here intentionally, is the gateway to the whole prefrontal cortex. You can have MDs, PhDs, Nobel laureates, etc. But if you're not paying attention, that gateway to all those higher qualities, compassion, empathy, cognitive, emotion regulation, etc., you cannot access it. So attention is the basic ground for all the other higher order capacities. So the question is, and I want you to pay attention now because this is it. This is the punchline. Everything after this is gravy or unpacking. This is it. How do we get from the imbalanced state, emotionally, attentionally, to a state of mind where we are psychologically flexible, adaptive, responsive, and I would suggest even feeling a sense of freedom from moment to moment, not consumed with past and future or anxiety, depression, but present? Well, this is it. That's it. Just plant this seed in your mind, WD-40. One way, after all these great grants and research and blah, 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 WD-40. What's one of the effects of mindfulness meditation? It's like if you've ever put a key in a lock and it's full of dirt and grit, you spray it with WD-40, and what happens? It loosens up the grit. And it makes it more pliable, flexible, smooth, so that you can actually access and make use of the innate qualities that we already have of paying attention, of experiencing emotion, of experiencing a healthy form of your own self. So that's the punchline, WD-40. Can you infuse your own mental state with WD-40? Yes, you can. Yes, we can. So here's a quick model of the brain. And we'll come back to this again and again. In the context of a stimulus, external or internal, real or imagined, we human animals have been sculpted through evolution to be able to shift our attention and emotional state within milliseconds, often even before we are consciously aware, through brain regions, a set of brain regions that work together to say, this is important to me. Philippe, pay attention. This is emotionally salient. This I really have to focus on. Boom, milliseconds. When this happens, we all know that we can shift from one emotional state to joy, bliss, attraction, happiness, or fear, anxiety, insecurity in even less than a second. This sends a bottom-up signal to say, hey, other brain regions, other brain circuits, psychological functions, please come and help. And that's what this is. A whole set of cognitive, attention, regulation sets of brain regions or circuitry that allow us to flexibly adapt to ongoing emotional experience. And this system is feeding up and then top-down feeding back down to regulate different aspects of emotion. Shift the emotion, make it shorter, increase the intensity, lower the intensity, etc. What's unique in human animals, as opposed to non-human primates, are the two little bubbles, self and language. Obviously, we have inner speech, inner talk, the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we mentally represent ourselves, the way that we relate to ourselves powerfully influences the contour and the flavors of the emotions we experience, and even our self-efficacy, our belief in our ability to work with our emotions skillfully. When this system is working well, I would suggest that we have the confidence to experience all kinds of emotions, and we're not afraid of feeling them. When this system is not functioning well, when it's dysfunctional, exaggerated emotional reactivity, deficient top-down regulation, this is the basis for anxiety disorders, eating disorders, depression, schizophrenia, suicidality, everything. So this is really super important, and this is actually becoming a very powerful construct in the next DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of the labels for all the psychological or psychiatric problems. The ability to experience emotions and to work with them skillfully. And this is a skill that can be learned. More work by Michael Posner and Jin Fan. They have done fantastic work in laying out some of the aspects or components of attention. Attention refers to many different aspects of attention. Here, they've actually identified different brain regions that are related to the ability to pay attention, alerting or vigilance. I'm going to place my attention here on my breath, for example. Reorienting. Oh, I hear this guy's voice on the stage, and he says to shift my attention to a thought, an image. Reorienting of attention. Super important skill. And then executive control. Well, when I get home tonight, and if I see my wife awake and she wants my attention, this is goal-directed executive control of my attention. I know that my life will be better if I pay attention to my wife. So I will. So it's top-down regulation of attention. These are just 3 sub-components of attention, but we'll get back to this in a moment. So 10 years ago, no respectable neuroscientist would be up here talking about meditation practices. You probably would be booed off the stage. Now, what is it, 2011? It's all the rage. It's all the rage. Why? Because it's another interesting method for training the mind. Any method that trains the mind or that trains the body, that's interesting as a scientist. Wonderful person, Antoine Lutz, fantastic researcher, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He, in one of the most conservative scientific journals, got this picture planted on the front cover. That's evidence that the editors have shifted their perspective and are a little bit more open. That's really cool. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this would not have been allowed. So here he did a fantastic paper looking at 2 different forms of attention training. First one is exemplified by Michael Jordan. Look at his face. Talk about top-down attention regulation, goal-oriented, focused attention. Single-pointed focus on getting that ball inside the hoop. This is an example of incredible training. In fact, Michael Jordan meditated. In fact, his coach was a meditator, a Zen meditator. In fact, I gave a talk last year, and I talked about this stuff, and somebody came up afterwards. He was like, I was the meditation coach for the Chicago Bulls. Why? Because you can train your mind. If you're doing sports, or if you're just a wife or a husband or a parent, you have to pay attention for quality of life. Another form, we can talk about that later. Another form of meditation training or training of attention is open monitoring. There's not a single object. But in fact, you're noticing or monitoring the ebb and flow of your own experience from moment to moment in order to recognize patterns in your own mind of the stream of thoughts, emotions, images, sensations. So we're going to do this right now. So put everything down, plant your feet on the ground. You can have your eyes closed or you can have your eyes open, but just your eye gaze down. And I'm going to guide you through these 2 different practices. And again, in the spirit of curiosity, investigation, examination, this is the most important research lab, your own experience. And it's free. You don't have to write a grant. You got it right here with you all the time. I'm serious. This is the most important thing. So, again, bringing your attention, grounding it in the sensation of your own breath. No right or wrong, simply noticing the sensation of your own breath as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Letting the mind's attention rest on the breath. Noticing gross and subtle sensations and how they arise and change as you breathe in and breathe out. And see how clear, laser beam-like, you can focus your attention on the different sensations that are arising and falling with each breath, moving in and moving out. And as distractions occur, sound, sensations, etc., note it and then gently bring your attention back to your breath. Notice the quality of your attention. And now I'd like you to figuratively open the field of view. And I'd like you to simply notice from moment to moment whatever is crossing your awareness. Any thought, image, memory, sensation, without pushing away or grasping at. Nothing to push away, nothing to hold on to. Simply noticing how a thought gives way to an image, to a sensation, to a memory, to another thought. Simply noticing the stream of contents moving through your mind. Okay, take a deep, deep, deep breath, and then open your eyes. By show of hands, how many people felt more distracted when you were trying to do single-pointed focus on the breath? How many people felt more distracted when you were doing the open monitoring? Oh, interesting. Okay, usually it's the other way around, but this is to simply point out, and I'm sure you've heard about it, individual differences. We all have different predilections and capacities, and that's why there are many, many different methods. But these are two specific forms of training that literally have different neural circuits. And again, Michael Posner and Jin Fan have actually identified different subcomponents of attention and different aspects of neural circuitry that support the ability to pay attention in these two very different ways. So, let me just go back one. There are many types of meditation practice. The word meditation is gom in Tibetan, bhavna in Sanskrit, and it means to cultivate. To cultivate qualities in the mind, to cultivate, almost like planting a seed in a field and cultivating, being patient, tending to, and noticing the qualities arising of qualities of the mind, and also cultivating an understanding of what are the mental processes that are functioning in your own mind. And I would suggest that one of the things that's fascinating about brain imaging, and there are many, many techniques, is that it allows us to go under the hood of the car, to go under the skull, and to actually let the brain speak for itself. In some cases, very few, people are really aware of the mental processes that are driving their decision making, their thinking, their actions, their behaviors. Usually you have to do a lot of training before you have that kind of mental acuity to see what's really driving our behavior. Simply put, there is a developmental trajectory of meditation training. usually done with a teacher, because teachers, hopefully, are more clear than my own mind. So they can point out when you are in a cul-de-sac, tangent, stuck, and bring you back. But simply put, there are many different kinds of practices to develop concentration. The mind has to be concentrated, settled, focused, so it's receptive to be able to develop many other kinds of qualities. So there are many ways to do this. You can do it through solving math problems, playing chess, doing sports, focused attention, images, visualization, sounds, mantras, open monitoring. There's many different ways to do this. When the mind is concentrated and settled and focused, that becomes the basis for the next level of practice, which is actually using our incredible human-animal capacities to think, to be analytic, to take perspectives, to take the perspective of another person, to actually step out of yourself, to analyze, to use language, reasoning. There's a whole set of practices, including death meditation, there are many, loving kindness, etc., that are arrived at through reasoning, thinking, analysis. Thank goodness our brain can support that. It's really great. Exemplified by what I did for 2 years, analytic debate in the Tibetan tradition. So much fun. It's so stodgy in Western academia. You write a paper, or you're at a meeting, you raise a question, blah, blah, blah. There, 2, 3, 4 hours, you are like debating and thinking and jumping and moving. That's the way to do it. And that actually replicates, what was it, the peripatetic school, where thinkers in ancient Greece were just walking around and thinking and debating. That's really fun. We don't do that so much here. But when you do that whole part, analytic reasoning, etc., that's not the end of the training. That's in the service of the real medicine, which is developing first a conceptual understanding of how we get stuck. A distorted view of the nature of the self and everything. And emptiness, or shunyata in Sanskrit, refers to a whole stage of practices that go from conceptual to non-conceptual. Some people might be familiar with non-dual, dissolving the mistaken view of the nature of the self. And I will show you some brain imaging data in a moment. We'll do some practices kind of related to this. But everything is in the service of that. Everything else is cute, nice, preparatory, but if you don't get to this, you don't have the medicine. So there really is a developmental trajectory. And so 33, 4, 5 years ago, this really nice gentleman here, John Kabat-Zinn, PhD, molecular biologist, University of Massachusetts Medical Center. He went to India, meditator, came back. Tons of people with chronic pain, physical chronic pain and emotional pain. And he developed a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. Now it is all the rage. It is accepted in almost many, at least on the West Coast and East Coast. Medical centers, clinics, hospitals offer it. Incredibly low cost, very effective for lots of things. And he really put this together, and it's become an explosion. And it's really helpful. Totally secular, not religious, not spiritual, boom, boom, boom. But the word mindfulness, mindfulness-based stress reduction. Mindfulness is sati or smriti in Sanskrit and Pali, and it has many different meanings. Mindfulness is not the best translation, but it means the quality of the mind that's able to adhere and focus in some contexts. In other contexts, it has to do with remembering to come back. Remembering to come back. So it has many different definitions, but here's what he's offered. Paying attention in a particular way. The psychology translation, some of it is here. Paying attention, alerting, training these different capacities of attention, blah, blah, blah. Doing it on purpose with a specific intention or motivation. Some research has actually found that the intention to train your mind influences how quickly you can train your mind and how much you actually develop. In the present moment, meaning experiential approach. The number one emotion regulation technique is avoidance. What do we do most of the, we had a little meter on our head. What are we doing most of the time, every day? Avoiding. It's easy and it's so freaking reinforcing. Think about it. Avoid. I'm not going to do it. Boom, boom, boom. It's so easy. So that's the number one emotion regulation. This is the opposite. This is avoiding, avoiding. Try practicing that for 10 minutes, for a day. Avoiding, avoiding. Staying in the experience as opposed to checking out, moving away, shutting off, yelling, screaming, turning off. This is really not trivial, and it's not easy to do. And this is the hardest part for Westerners, doing this in a non-judgmental, non-self-deprecating manner. Really, really, who here has not had a negative thought about themselves today? You don't have to raise your hands. Really, think about it. This is really the curse of Western culture. We have such poor low self-esteem, even people who are Stanford professors. That's another insidious part of our brain. The part that allows us to create and think and imagine also thinks and imagines that I suck. That's horrible. That's sad. The inverse is an attitude of openness, curiosity, investigation, not assuming that I know the way it is. So I said this MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program. How many people here have done an MBSR course? Okay, a few. Really cheap. It's like $200, $300. Kaiser offers it everywhere on the West Coast. It's really interesting training. You don't even have to have any problems. Just go and do it. It's really, your partners will be happy. It's a hodgepodge. There's formal meditation practice, like breath focus, body scan, attention shifting, cultivating loving kindness, formal meditation practice. And then equally important are the informal practices, momentary pauses. So right now, don't change anything. Just bring your attention to the next breath that you have. That's it. Informal practice. Meaningful pause. You develop the muscle of paying attention to your own experience even for 3 seconds and 5 seconds. And you do it many times a day. That literally develops the muscle of paying attention. Not difficult to do and very important. Now, there's a whole other component which is equally powerful, which is the Hatha Yoga. I don't know if Kelly has talked about it here, but physical yoga, which obviously contains mental training and spiritual training. How many people here practice yoga a little bit? We are in California. Yoga is the physical instantiation of everything we've just been talking about. And it's incredible just to notice the asymmetries. All right, moving along, just to make this graphic. If you could put a meter on my head. The question is, how much of the time am I actually in the present? How much of the time am I future tripping? Oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. It hasn't even happened yet. I'm totally freaking out about it. Wake up 3 in the morning. Oh my gosh, I got to. Past tripping. Oh my gosh, I said something stupid. You know. So that's actually anxiety and depression. In general, anxiety is about totally worrying about something that hasn't even happened yet. Phobia. Depression is worrying about something that's already happened. It's done. And then, unfortunately, we swim in that. So this is just to say, doing a self-assessment. Where are you? So, social anxiety disorder, caveat. I worked with Murray Steen, psychiatrist, down at UC San Diego. When I first worked with him, I was like, social anxiety, what's that? What are you talking about? It's just shyness. It's no problem. I didn't believe in it, to be totally honest. And then slowly, the more that I sat with people, the more I began to appreciate it. And it's a very interesting problem because people can look so well. Models, Linda Ronstadt, sports superstar athletes, Stanford professors. You get just an inch under the hood, there's a lot of suffering, doubt, confusion, pain, loneliness. Loneliness is the key feature. Distorted self-view and a deep sense of loneliness. So I became interested in it. Huge lifetime prevalence. About 12% of adults in the United States, Europe, etc., will experience some social anxiety. Maybe not the severe, because it exists on a continuum. Fourth most common psychiatric condition or psychological problem after what? Major depression, substance alcohol abuse, and specific phobias. Fear of blood, fear of elevators, heights, etc. Fourth most common problem in the DSM. Early onset. You talk to people, they're like, yeah, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I knew that I was really inhibited, shy. I felt different from everybody else. And that's a problem because if you look at the trajectory of problems, social anxiety precedes and is a risk factor for the subsequent development of other anxiety disorders, major depression, and of course I'm going to drink and take drugs because I don't like going to parties or dating or going to, you know. So all of these problems have underneath, not in all cases, social anxiety. Very, very common, very infrequently assessed, and very infrequently treated. So we did a study. We just finished several studies, but here's one. A randomized control trial or clinical trial where we took people with social anxiety, randomly assigned them to mindfulness-based stress reduction, small group, or aerobic exercise, my favorite form of emotion regulation. And we gave them 2 months plus of training, and then we assessed them again, then we followed them up. And here's an important punchline. We found in this particular study for people with social anxiety, adults, the more that during the mindfulness training, the more that you practiced mindfulness, the more the reduction in your social anxiety, a dose effect. You don't always find this, but this suggests that there's an association of more practice, greater reduction in social anxiety symptoms. That's promising. Don't trust one study. You need many, many different studies to see that it's really something important. Brain. Well, these are one of the tools that we use. Functional magnetic resonance imaging. The physics behind MRI are stunningly exquisite, elegant, beautiful. If you ever get a chance, it's so beautiful. It's amazing that human beings can imagine thinking right here, a set of ideas and images, and then create this machine that allows you to visualize what's happening in the brain without harming it and without drugs. It's incredible. It's just a bunch of people's thoughts that created this. So I love this tool. So I use it all the time. It is noisy. It's going to get better in the future. We give them lots of nice headphones, etc. But here's a one-slide primer of how you do functional brain imaging data analysis. You start by putting somebody inside the scanner. Then you present them with their own negative self-beliefs. For example, people think I'm socially incompetent, awkward, weird. Well, that immediately sets some neurons firing that then trigger whole circuits to start language processing. Is this related to me? Thinking, memory, past, autobiographical memory, etc. So it actually sets off neurons that fire, consume glucose and oxygen. The neurons say, hey, send more fuel, send more oxygen and glucose. So you start getting cerebral blood flow, blood volume, and hemoglobin being delivered to the site where neurons are firing. So right now when you're looking at a face, there's the fusiform face area. That's firing right now, and more blood flow is going to that area. Boom. Then a lot of statistics, and then you make these color maps that show intensity of activity in different brain regions, and then you begin being the neurofunctional detective. How does this relate to anxiety, to meditation, to psychological capacities of emotion, thinking, paying attention? So we already saw that this is a simplified but very helpful set of functions, and there are many more functions, where we can begin to say, well, how would a training influence these different psychological systems that are instantiated in our brains? Well, some brain data. Here, this is reacting to your own negative self-beliefs versus neutral statements. Post minus pre. And the blue here is sitting in a place called the amygdala, which I'm sure you've heard about. One region that's important for emotional awareness, emotion detection. This is important to me. It generates an emotion. The blue here in adults with social anxiety, pre to post mindfulness training, blue means that that's decreased in activity compared to baseline when reacting to your own negative self-beliefs. So some neural evidence that mindfulness training is influencing part of the emotional reactivity system. So I'd mentioned that we've already had a whole set of brain regions that have been previously identified by great work, looking at different aspects of attention regulation. Punchline. Again, what are the brain regions that are doing the regulating when I'm looking at my negative self-beliefs? Well, there's a set of brain regions here that are more actively recruited after mindfulness training in these adults with social anxiety, suggest that load on to that attention regulation. Recruitment of brain regions that support the ability of attentional engagement, focused, not avoiding. If I had avoided, those would not be recruited. So the evidence, again, from different brain systems of attentional, the ability to sustain your attention, even for something that's not pleasant. More importantly, the regions in red, the more that those were recruited after mindfulness training, greater reduction in anxiety. A brain clinical symptom relationship. Now the story gets exciting. Brain imaging is really nice, cute, etc. But unless it's related to other human behaviors, how do we interpret it? Oh, there we go. Okay, we're getting there. Another quick practice. So again, if you could just put everything down. Second to last practice, contemplation, reflection. So again, you can have your eyes open or you can have your eyes closed. Use the ever-present experience of your own breath as the anchor to focus your attention. And what I'd like you to do now is to bring to mind, to literally see in your mind's eye, an image of yourself when you were about 4 or 5 years old. And what I'd like you to notice in your mind is what adjectives arise when I ask you, what are the qualities of this person? How would you describe this person's qualities? What adjectives arise in your mind? Now fast forward to about age 15, 16, high school, that version of you. Who is that person? What are his or her qualities? And now moving to the present, the person seated right here, right now. Who is this person? What qualities does this person have in the present? And now moving 10 years into the future, generate an image of yourself 10 years from now. Who is that version of the self? What are his or her qualities? How would you describe that person's qualities 10 years into the future? Okay, now take a deep breath and open your eyes. How many people had a more positive view of the self when you were about 5? How many people had a more positive view of yourself about 15? The present version of you? The future version of you? Individual differences. This is really interesting. This is what we deal with in psychotherapy. Versions of the self. Not that anyone is more valid or real. So this is the circuit that you were just exercising. Wonderful research. Again, 10, 15 years ago, no respectable neuroscientist would talk about the self. What are you talking about? Get off the stage. Now, again, this is all the rage. There are so many studies. And what's really been interesting is there's a set of midline structures, brain regions, that literally support what you were just doing now. Conceptual, self-focused attention. Conceptual self-view. The mental representation of me, past, present, future. This ventral medial, dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate precuneus. So reliable. Brain imaging is so cool because just in minutes, you see this beautiful, beautiful circuit. But what's cool is this is conceptual sense of self. which suggests that are there other modes of self-referential processing, self-focused processing, that are not conceptual? And in fact, this conceptual or narrative sense of self is very much the basis of understanding who we are, our story, past, present, future-oriented, past, future-oriented, fixed self-concept, very much connected with rumination. But there are other ways of relating to the self, experiential or embodied sense of self, that actually are triggered or supported by different brain circuits that have to do with anterior insula, the visceral experience of this body, somatosensory, all physical, visceral sense of self. And in fact, there are probably many modes of self, and we haven't done this research, but probably from moment to moment to moment, we are shifting through many different modes of self-processing that we're not even aware of. And that when we get stuck in certain ones, like conceptual self, negative self-view, rumination, doubt, depression, boom. So one part of the flexibility is actually having these multiple modes which are already built into the brain, into our psychology, and literally having that fluidity. Very simple task. We lie you in the scan, put you in the scanner, and we give you a cue. Just, is the word in all uppercase letters? Yes, no. Is it positively valenced or emotion word? Does the word describe me? Then we give you a string of words, adjectives. Incredibly simple, 3-4 minutes, you get this great brain activity. Be you a healthy control, non-anxious, non-depressed, social phobic, you see very clear activation in these 3 brain regions in the black circles. Very robust effect. And here what you see is that from pre to post mindfulness training in the adults with social anxiety, we actually see a reduction, black, in negative self-view. Very interesting. This self-report. Increase in positive self-view. And now we've replicated this in another study. So but mostly just the reduction in negative. So one of the aspects of mindfulness might be influencing a habitual pattern of grasping or viewing the self as negative, in a negative light, and beginning to let go of that. The other things that we see, again, blue meaning a reduction in brain activity from baseline to post-mindfulness in brain regions that are related to language, linguistic processing, conceptual self-view, cognitive reappraisal, or cognitive attempts to control experience. Reduction in all of that, which suggests that really it's more of this attentional engagement and reduction, and actually other groups have found this too, you turn off your prefrontal cortex momentarily. You turn on brain regions that have to do with attentional engagement. So the brain can show this to us in a way that people could not self-report. So in summary, in the context of threat or a negative stimulus, real or imagined, your own negative self-belief or someone's facial expression, we see that the effects of mindfulness are that emotional reactivity goes down, both in the brain and self-report. The ability to pay attention and to regulate attention goes up. Conceptual self-view goes down, and specifically negative self-view. And even the use of language, when asked to regulate your emotion, is quelled, suggesting that mindfulness meditation training, at least in these adults with social anxiety, really changes how these different brain systems are functioning. Back to our WD-40 as the punchline. And now one last component, compassion. So I'm going to do this very quickly. I can do this in 5 minutes. Last, contemplation. So again, if you could just rest your eyes or close them, bring your attention to your breath. Now I'd like you to take your right hand and put it over your chest, specifically on top of your heart. And see if you can feel the sensation and the rhythm of your own heart beating. Take time to literally feel your own heart right this moment. Slow down and feel your heart. Now, I'd like you to imagine seated in front of you is a person who you totally love, respect, trust. And I'd like you to imagine reaching out with your left hand and placing your hand on that person's chest, over that person's heart. And imagine literally feeling in the palm of your hand the sensation of the other person's heart. Making contact with another person. And just considering that just like me, this person wishes to be cared for, to be loved, to be respected. Just like me. This person seated in front of me, who I care for, will definitely have moments of self-doubt, insecurity, confusion. Just like me. May this person seated in front of me develop the skills, the insights, the clarity to be well, to be kind, to be caring, to be loved, just like me. Take 2 deep breaths, and then open your eyes. Look at this picture. Look at the 4 faces depicted. Do some research. What do you think is happening in these different people's faces, body, touch, curiosity, sympathy, empathy, joining, resonating? Same theme. 15 years ago, only probably 2, 3, 4 people would ever do empirical, hardcore research on empathy or compassion. Right now, across the planet Earth, this is the rage. I'm serious. The top neuroscientists are studying this. You'll see why in a moment. Compassion does not mean being angelic. If that was the case, I would fail every day. You cannot set the bar so high such that we fail and we don't even try. It does not mean to sprout wings and become an angel. On the other side, our beautiful, beautiful brains and our evolution and our psychology also contain the dark side. We all have this capacity. This human being here was probably at some point a very decent child, loved, appreciated, cherished, just how I love my 2 daughters. Given the right context, a study was done behind this wall, Phil Zimbardo, you can make somebody act horribly. Given the right context, supported by our own tax money, you can create monsters. So sad, but very human. So this is super important. This is not a game, and it's not cute, and it's not just science. It has incredibly deep ramifications. But to express compassion, connectivity, can happen anywhere, in the middle of the battlefield. Pablo Casals said, "I feel the capacity to care is the thing which gives life its deepest significance." To care can be simply reaching the hand out when somebody's about to fall, smiling at someone, giving someone your cell phone, answering a question, paying attention, listening when I don't feel like listening because I'm so tired and I really don't want to listen to my wife, but I know that this would be compassion. Paying attention, using that attention regulation network. That's action. That's compassion right in the moment. It's not difficult to do, and it doesn't cost a penny. We are born innately with the capacity to recognize facial expressions in others in the first month, to respond, to mimic that brain circuitry that allows us to have that has mirror neurons, to see another person, make a representation of that person, a sense-felt representation of the other, not just me, the other, and then to take action, and it even translates into facial expressions. That's hardwired in us, and it's a capacity that can be developed, trained, and enhanced and refined. And wonderful work, Tanya Singer, one of the preeminent neuroscientists. This is her whole thing, studying what are the parts of the brain that work together to feel pain in another, physical or emotional, to actually take the perspective of the other. We already have this. She's actually, and many others, are working on literally delineating what are the neural bases of these capacities that make us beautifully human, and how much can it be trained. So, as the Dalai Lama said, love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, in this more and more everyday interconnected world, where you do something tonight and it impacts people 5,000 miles away, because we are incredibly interconnected now. Humanity cannot survive. Lots of people, many more people, help do all of this work. Lots of mentors who have helped me stay in graduate school and get a PhD when I felt like leaving. Helped me, rein me in to actually get work done, teach me how to be a clinician, how to be a neuroscientist. Lots of money from many institutes that fund all this expensive research. And lastly, we are doing current studies, and I will give you everybody a flyer later before you leave. If you, and everybody does know someone who has social phobia or social anxiety, or even chronic back pain, we're very fortunate. We just got money for 2 5-year studies, 2 separate studies for 5 years, to look at the effects of mindfulness meditation versus cognitive behavioral therapy for people who are suffering from social anxiety and also from chronic back pain. Probably the 2 most prevalent problems. So we'll give you a flyer later, but please, if everybody knows somebody who has social anxiety, no drugs, no medication, just behavioral therapy, mindfulness meditation. This is my contact info. It also will be on the flyer. And if you're interested, I have several talks on YouTube. That's one of the great things. Google has been really great in supporting me and gives several Google Tech Talks, and they upload them. So I think I have like 3 or 4 different talks right on. You can be in your pajamas in bed and, if you want, and watch a talk. So thank you for your attention.
The first thing I want to say, which is not so much a question as just commentary, thinking back, you had mentioned 10 years ago, no respectable psychologist or neuroscientist would study meditation or compassion. And well, so it reminds me of being here as a graduate student, 12 years ago, and practicing and teaching this stuff in a different part of my life, and coming into the scientific laboratory, talking about different emotion regulation strategies with James Gross, who you met a couple weeks ago, and in lab meetings trying to raise this new concept of mindfulness, and there's this other way to deal with negative emotions that doesn't involve trying to distract yourself or suppress it or think differently, but just feel it. And in lab meetings, people being like, "What are you talking about, you crazy person?" That's that Buddhist stuff. And then you came along to the laboratory in 2000 and...
Started 2002.
2002.
The lab, James Gross' lab, 2003, February.
Yeah, so you arrived, and it was like this sea change. It was almost kind of a miracle, showing up as the meditation researcher. And that actually had a really transformative effect on the laboratory and in the department. So if you didn't know him, Philippe really is the person who brought this meditation research to our department, and now it's one of the most interesting topics of research for graduate students specifically come here to get to work in this department because we have such an innovative research agenda on meditation and mindfulness. And I just wanted to acknowledge that you had described that difference, but you're a big reason that difference has taken place.
Little reason. Little reason meeting a lot of openness.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that you are our first speaker who actually acknowledged your collaborators at the end of your talk and your funding sources. And it reminded me of a meditation practice that I've learned from the Tibetan tradition of keeping a mental list of your benefactors and remembering them every day and going through that list. And so that just made me think, how many other ways has your training in these contemplative traditions and Buddhist philosophy influenced you as a scientist?
I mean, actually, when you're saying that, I was thinking about my mom, because I realized I should put a picture of my mom up there too, and my dad. But
well, that's a practice too, to think of everyone as your mother. Yeah.
Yes, but because my mom was the one who actually said, she went to, she was a psychotherapist, and she took off at age 50, went off to India and Nepal by herself, came back, and then she said, Philippe, you have to go. I'm like, what? And she said, you have to go to Asia. And I ended up doing my junior and my senior year abroad through the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Nepal, living with Nepalese families, Tibetan families, learning about Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, learning Nepali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, going to monasteries and blah, blah, blah. So that's actually super important. But I must say, and I try to emphasize this to other people, in terms of science and bringing that intense curiosity and rigor, and being able to wake up in the morning, because most people are not happy or content. But when I was able to bring my love of studying Eastern thought, meditation, brain, clinical, and finding a way to combine it, that's really when I became much more happy. And so, I mean, if you can bring passion and openness to what you do every day as a scientist, which is really a great honor, right? I mean, many times, giving thanks, I think, I could be on the toll booth 8 hours. I have actually sometimes summers flipped hamburgers all summer, which I love cooking too, but it's really so amazing to have the gift to think and challenge and grow, and especially here at Stanford, but anywhere, to work with people who are way smarter, who push my boundaries. Literally, last week, this Helena Kramer, who is a superstar guru biostatistician who I bow to in the psychiatry department, and she just challenged me to go way beyond my thinking and stats. And at first, I was scared. I literally was sitting there going, "I'm not going to understand. I'm not going to understand." And then I was like, "Philippe, just chill out, relax." No, I just self-doubt that I'm smart enough. That's social anxiety, but I'm not smart enough. And I was thinking, no, just relax. It's okay to be initially apprehensive, and then, yeah, it is. And then you go, and then relax your mind and just stay with it. So I stayed up till 1 in the morning, rereading 1.5 pages again and again and again with equations and things, and finally getting it. And thinking, because values. I value her, and I value thinking, and I value discovering, and I value going beyond what I think I can do, to just relax and to dive in. And that can be applied to anything. In science, we hopefully do that a lot and get out of our comfort zone so we can expand our thinking and our practice, hopefully.
So that brings to mind another question. There's this joke in the world of psychology that you can tell everything you need to know about a psychologist based on what they study. Or you find out what's wrong with their mother. It's one of those two.
Yeah, they say that.
And then, in my experience, I've also found that people tend to come to contemplative practices like meditation because they're suffering. So you strike me as someone who does not have social anxiety.
No.
And I'm actually really curious what brought you both to the contemplative practices to end suffering and to clinical psychology, which is all about ending suffering. You mentioned your mom telling you to go, which I suppose is one way into the field. But is there another reason that you chose to focus on suffering?
Yeah, that's a rich question. In terms of the contemplative practices, when I was in Nepal, I went to a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, and they had a 1-month-long retreat for Westerners taught by Tibetans and Westerners who became monks. And I was fascinated very much with 2 things that really, really compelled me. One was the death meditation, of which there are many flavors and varieties, and somebody asked about that. And that's a really not morbid. In fact, it's just the opposite. And it comes in many flavors, and we're not going to do it here. But it's really, I found that, wow, how interesting that a culture that actually practices this to open the mind, to make it more open instead of constricted, to make it more receptive instead of fearful. The other thing was, when I looked at all the paintings and also the people that I saw who were deep practitioners, but also the depictions, androgyny. I was like, wow, I'd never been exposed to a culture where they showed male and female qualities integrated into one. And when I was 20-ish, or 20 or 21, when I first went off to India and Nepal, and when I saw these images, I was like, that's so fascinating and foreign to me, and it intrigued me about what are these qualities. That's the contemplative part, and then it just continued to grow and grow and grow. But the scientific part, I don't know. In one way, I don't really see myself as an academic. I'm kind of a weirdo, an academe, but I'm incredibly curious, and I love, I can give you an example that helps understand my interest in being a therapist, but also in science. When I really came to the understanding that when I sit with a person in therapy, that person is in a whole array of experience and data points and life forces. And when I open up an Excel or SPSS spreadsheet that shows a matrix of data, it's just like this, in the sense that if I can see the underlying patterns inside this complex matrix, I can actually help this person as a therapist, or I can understand what the data is saying. So, that's actually been really an interesting insight. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So your sense of curiosity, viewing us all as a set of data points, that is a first,
or matrix,
I think.
with lots of data and relationships. Yeah. And we are. Our brains are picking up billions of pieces of data every single moment. My brain's only consciously aware of a tiny little bit, thank goodness. But that's happening all the time.
Well, this idea that you mentioned in your talk, that one of the most helpful things we can do is to treat our own minds and bodies as a laboratory, and that we can investigate what's happening, and we can also try new things and see what the effects are. That strikes me as being both profoundly how to think like a psychologist and also Buddhist. And so thank you for sharing that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, we set up behavioral experiments to help all of us, to see, well, what am I actually doing? How am I responding? Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, right? We have the hippocampus that allows us to maintain a sense of, to remember that we are ourselves, like me, I'm Philippe. How about if I woke up tomorrow morning, totally intact, and for some reason, for 2 days, my hippocampus was not functioning, and I forgot who I am? I could still function, but wasn't that wild that a sense of self is embedded in the brain to maintain order and reasoning? But that can be temporarily, certain drugs and things, or even just, So it's actually quite fascinating to experiment and to think, does this laboratory work? And if you can figure this out, then you have more compassion for other people who are figuring it out.
Presumably not doing brain surgery to remove our hippocampus, though.
Right, let's not do that.
Yeah.
Unnecessary.
Mindfulness meditation of body and breath is probably a better way to deconstruct the conceptual self than removing your hippocampus. Okay, I wanted to ask you one last thing before I turn it over to them. You do work bringing mindfulness to a lot of different settings, not just the laboratory and not just the therapy. You teach kids, you teach families, which may be even better than teaching just the kids. And you also teach mindfulness at Google and in the workplace. And in prison. And in prisons. And I know that a lot of people here are especially interested in bringing this to kids and families. So I was hoping you could say a little bit about that.
Yes. We did a study with 8 to 12-year-olds and their moms and dads together, doing a mindfulness-based stress reduction. This was done with Amy Saltzman, a mindfulness teacher, and other people. And it was really fascinating. It's my favorite study in the sense that instead of an individual person, we're actually the unit of the whole family was the focus. And we used audio tapes, et cetera, and how do you infuse mindfulness as a family practice? So instead of turning the TV on, maybe the whole family sits for 1 minute. Maybe before the bathtub, before homework, before bed, before a difficult conversation. How does a family literally infuse that sensibility of mindfulness, curiosity, openness, dropping habitual patterns, and experimenting on a family level? I think it's amazing, and I think there's tremendous interest in all of that.
Can you give an example of how you would explain that to like a 7-year-old?
Yeah, and I go back to Amy Saltzman. She talks about the still, quiet place inside. So you can talk about, how like a beaver or an animal that floats, just floating on the water effortlessly, or a bubble from soap, just floating with the wind. And many visual imagery is actually very helpful, I think, especially with kids. and short and sweet. And like even at their schools in Oakland that are bringing, and actually all over the country, trying to bring mindfulness quality and practices to school. So I met a teacher on a vacation, and she said, yeah, we were trained to just use the bell to get all of our 2-year-old, our second graders just to sit for a minute. And so they come back from recess, they come back from lunch, boing, and the kids just sit. Making that a practice and in introducing that as something that's even possible. Then also in the prison, we have studies where we're doing motion regulation training in a separate, as one arm. Another arm is 10-day silent, although they're probably not too silent, Vipassana meditation retreat, meditating all day for like 10 hours. Really amazing. This is a high security, maximum security prison with killers, and these guys are doing it in Alabama, and it's really impressive. So there's no place that is not a basis for practicing. Anytime, anywhere, in the toilet, anywhere. It's just a quality. If you know what that quality is, you can bring it any moment. And that's actually really neat. You can train the mind. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to let you call on folks from around the room if they have questions.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay.
Sunday New York Times in the art section had a very lengthy article about Sir Colin Davis, the conductor. It was fascinating because it showed his many different lives through all where when he finally was appointed to London, he seemed to finally settle down. He was ready. They were ready for him as well. My question is, he lost his wife in a long-term relationship, over 50 years, a year ago. And it's clear from the article that he's failed. He cannot cope with this, even though he keeps accepting conducting assignments at least 2 years out, even though he keeps saying, well, I won't be around. But he takes them, and he's still conducting, and he's a great conductor. What are you doing, or what are others doing, to deal with his current situation, which obviously he's a man who's very active, mentally, music, etc. But also, he just cannot deal with the fact that she is not there. Now, I know this is a very common thing. Give us some answers.
Oh boy.
Wait, even before you give answers, you have the challenge of repeating that question briefly for the sound.
Just very simply put, long-term relation, or even short-term, and you lose it. Either because in reality, it could be a partner dies, or even a partner just disappears, and the sense of grieving, and then how do you cope? And some people cannot cope. I mean, one of the thoughts crossed my mind is that, probably as a man, and this is a stereotype for another, older generation, just to keep active and doing, that's where the identity has been embedded. And maybe if I stopped conducting or stopped working, that's why lots of people can't retire, because they have no other view of self other than themselves as that. Sometimes the feelings can be so painful, and maybe this person has not gone to psychotherapy, and maybe psychotherapy wouldn't even help. Maybe this is the best that person can do, is to keep working.
That's not an optimistic approach for someone like myself who's in the same category, except I don't conduct.
What do you love?
Pardon?
What do you love?
What do I love?
Doing.
Who?
What? Well, that's up to you. It could be a who, or it could be a what, or it could be an activity.
Oh,
what?
Music, yes, of course. Why would I read that whole article? why do I go to 35 to 40 performances a year?
Yeah, why can I? And I've found this fascinating in terms of the brain. Driving, and then suddenly a Bruce Springsteen song comes on, and within 3 seconds I'm crying. And I don't even know really why, but it's like music, sound, fundamental, even more fundamental than language and everything else. Being in mommy's womb, we hear sound. And music touches so deep. So I would like If you love music, love it even deeper. Go for it. And you have to find what, there's no answer. There's no answer. But, and
all these studies, you don't have any.
I'll just put it this way. Listen, just being totally honest, there's some people who have partners and are suffering more than people who don't have partners. No, it's not sneaky. It's actually totally honest. It's not sneaky. The thing is that, as much as we rely on each other, we all, 50 years from now, chances are not one of us will be alive on this planet. And the reality is that, before that, we pass away now, we have the opportunity, since we're healthy, intelligent, capable, blessed, to explore the things that bring you love and right now, because why not? And there's no answer to your question.
Yeah, but the sharing that music is extremely important.
Yeah.
My partner and I enjoy it very much.
Yeah.
So I think,
connectedness.
I speak for myself particularly, but I think I would find it incredibly much harder to do that, what you're just suggesting.
It may not be easy. There is no answer.
I have to read dress songs.
I still don't have an answer. There are many things that we can't answer per se outside of ourselves. Probably the majority of things we're not going to get from somebody else.
Shut up. Thank you.
I'll shut up too.
How long do you need to meditate and how often?
Yes. Great question. How long do you need to meditate? How often before you see the benefits? Individual differences. Some people are ready. And you can begin to make tremendous progress. Other people can meditate forever and they're just looping. Some people try to meditate on their own without the help of a teacher and they get stuck. Sometimes you find the right teacher or right method and so there's no set answer to that too. Sorry, I wish it was easier. It's not.
Several times we've talked about finding a good teacher.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
Ooh. Give me the answer. Well, first of all, I could say that here on the East Coast and the West Coast, boy, are we blessed. We have many, and I'm not just talking about like a spiritual or Buddhist teacher. It could even be like your mentor of, it could even be somebody who's just, you're a mentor who teaches you how to play chess or something. It's not, you don't necessarily know what guise or appearance it comes in. For a concrete example, the San Francisco Chronicle wrote an article about a toll taker on the Golden Gate Bridge, on the San Francisco side, obviously. So many people were moved with some sense of quality in 15 seconds, interacting with this guy, that they reported again and again and again, and finally someone wrote an article about it. So you never know who actually carries quality. And if your sensors are open, you might feel it. Doesn't have to, you never know, but you have to be open to it. But there are people who are, yeah. So, anywho, in the back. And then I'll come this way.
In your research on cognitive behavioral therapy
Yeah.
versus mindfulness, what is your hypothesis?
Oh, for the current study. So we did I didn't talk about, we just finished a 5-year study of individual cognitive behavioral therapy for social anxiety versus a weightless control, brain imaging, blah, 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 blah. I didn't talk about that at all. We're doing a new study now where people are randomized to group cognitive behavioral therapy, group mindfulness, and a weightless control. We know that those things work. Our main question is, for whom does a specific training work? Can we predict that? And also, what are the mechanisms that are changing when a person benefits from a certain training? Specifically, we do have a hypothesis about that mindfulness meditation training might influence attention regulation circuits more so than cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy will probably impact cognitive regulation circuits more so than mindfulness. But that's the question. Then we let the data speak. But we're interested in mechanisms predictors and looking at long-term response, 1 year post-training completion. Can we actually predict who will be better a year after training? Okay.
In your studies about reducing anxiety by meditation practice, did you do in people who were clinically anxious? I mean, it really, I say this because when I've been very, very anxious, I cannot meditate. I have to be kind of down a bit. I'm just interested in what you found about that.
Yeah, in the same way that a person who has major depression may actually benefit from taking an SSRI or an antidepressant, reducing some of the symptoms, and then being ready to make use of psychotherapy. Similarly, there are certain levels of anxiety where, you know, I may just benefit from going out and hugging a tree. Forget about sitting down and meditating. Meditation is not a cure-all. And again, there are many forms of meditation, right? Some are not just seated meditation. And the mind has to be ready, pliable, to benefit from. So in fact, in certain states of mind, the best thing might be to go out and call a friend and go to the movies, go have a nice glass of wine, go for a walk up in the hills, chill, be in nature, see animals. Yeah. And this gets back to creativity, psychological flexibility, WD-40. Loosen up the habitual concrete patterns that we build up and accrue and accrete over time, because that's the inverse of psychological flexibility.
Did you ever work with schizophrenic?
Yeah, I've done CBT, cognitive therapy, group CBT, and individual CBT with the people with schizophrenia. And being with somebody with schizophrenia is fascinating and humbling, because we're just, you know, a millimeter away from that mental state.
I was psychiatric.
Yeah.
25 years ago. There was always a question of, well, is it safe to do meditation with somebody who's schizophrenic? Are they going to go off into the...
Yeah, it's probably not indicated. In the same way that most forms of meditation are not indicated for a person who is has current major depression. There's definitely evidence for mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction as a relapse prevention for people who already have been cured, or well, cured, have been, you know, relieved from major depression, and it helps prevent relapse. But meditation is not a treatment for major depression. Anxiety is much more pliable with meditation practice. But even meditation practice, you know, clinically, you know, we have good medications, and we have cognitive behavioral therapy, we have acceptance commitment therapy, we have lots of different treatments that probably you would do first. Yeah. Yeah.
This term mindfulness sounds so general.
Yeah.
We often are told, be mindful, be
Yeah.
considerate. And in the 1980s, there were a number of psychology books about optimistic thinking, about auto-suggestive thinking.
Yeah.
Is that the same?
No, definitely not. But I totally agree. There's actually a movement among, I'm sorry, the word mindfulness is so kind of generalized now, and it's kind of non-specific, and does it refer to auto-suggestion or to optimistic thinking? And so many people have now said we should stop using the word mindfulness and go back to the original Sanskrit, in the same way that we use the word karma or other terms where we can actually define it more specifically. And again, from the texts, the same exact word, sati or smriti, Sanskrit, Pali, have very different meanings depending on the context in which they're used, and the word mindfulness does not capture those. So yeah, mindfulness has become super popular, but in general, I think it's just pointing to present moment awareness, a certain quality of attention, a certain, and the way that I experience it is simply like I can actually wash the dishes and my mind is racing about other things, and then I can wash the dishes and I can just feel the plate, the water, the present. There are very simple shifts that I experience, not often enough. And that's one aspect of it. But the word mindfulness no longer really means anything. In the same way that attention doesn't really mean anything, because there's actually, you know, many, many different, more specific subcomponents of attention that means something, and the word attention is just a rubric. Yeah. That's not a great answer, but that begins to help.
Could you recommend a beginner's book on practicing mindfulness?
Yeah, actually, any of the books are by Pema Chodron or Thich Nhat Hanh. Pema Chodron is a beautiful educator, teacher, grandma who became a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and she brings that simple, like, kindergarten sensibility of teaching kids into her writing, and she's beautifully simple and clear. She's Pema Chodron, P-E-M-A, Chodron, C-H, let's see how she spells, C-H-O-D-R-O-N. Chodron. Thich Nhat Hanh is another Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk. His writings are, he's got, I don't know, probably 30 books. He's very simple and clear. And that would be, yeah. And then I would suggest taking an MBSR class where you just, for 2 months, once a week, you actually practice a whole bunch of these different exercises or contemplations. Mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful listening, mindful speaking, mindful sitting, mindful burping, etc. Okay.
Throughout your years of research, do you see the downside of meditation?
Oh, there are definitely, throughout the years of research, have I seen a downside of meditation? Well, not even in research. When I was living in the monastery, I lived in the Dalai Lama's monastery for 3 years. Very, obviously a monastery, safe place. There are certain, as you develop, the practices become more challenging. And in the same way that, you would not make a hot soup in a pot made out of plastic, you need a mind that's very stable to take more intense liquids in. In the same way, if you are too fast and you try to do a practice that's more advanced than your mind can handle, you can freak out. So I've seen Tibetans, I've seen Indians, I've seen, even in the monastery where I lived, monks who were doing retreat who lost it. What in psychology we'd say, anxiety, not even anxiety, they lost it. They had a mental breakdown. Fortunately, they were in an environment where people immediately took action, protected them, took care of them. Here in the West, and thank you for asking this question, this is a major problem. We have many, many different centers, but people go learn a technique, and it might be 1 day, it might be a 3 day, it might be a 10 day, it might be a month-long retreat. It might be silence for 10 days. I've done several of those. It might be silence for 30 days. But when it's done, there's no support group. You go back to Brooklyn, to Palo Alto, to San Francisco, and you might be on your own, and you might not be able to integrate, and you might have a breakdown. That happens a lot, and it's a hot topic right now. And actually, I have a friend, Willoughby, Brown University, is doing research exactly on this, the iatrogenic, the negative effects of certain practices and meditation retreats in the United States as a function of not having the backup support, which is the community, skillfully taken action to support you when you come off. I mean, and I've experienced this myself. 9 days not speaking, no eye contact, only breakfast, lunch, sleeping a few hours, feeling more and more clear after 9 days, and then after that having to speak. I mean, it's pretty disturbing to notice how much energy is consumed by speaking, listening, talking, looking, and it's actually a little depressing. But the challenge is the integration, right? That's the challenge. But not everyone's ready for that, and I think that's where wisdom comes in. And not everyone's ready. Some people don't make the right choice. You're not ready to do retreat. That takes a lot of maturity. So.
Question: when I was reading your articles today, which I really enjoyed, rumination.
Rumination.
Rumination. I have a family member who I think ruminates unhelpfully so. Do you have any suggestions on how to suggest something like MBSR or mindfulness or meditation, but not have a flare and a very defensive reaction from the person?
Yes, okay, so to repeat the question, family member who ruminates a lot and probably has lots of negative self-critical thoughts and maybe thoughts about others, and how do you skillfully introduce to that person the suggestion? Maybe you want to learn a skill that might be helpful. Well, one of the things about mindfulness-based stress reduction is that most of us don't see that as psychotherapy or as therapy or even as group therapy. it's learning a stress reduction technique. So how we frame that might help a person who might be, I will never go see a doctor or a medication or a therapist. Majority of people. Oh, but stress reduction? Yeah, that sounds good. Learn some skills? Well, that's cool. Maybe you go with them. You do it together virtually online on Skype. No, I'm not joking. Actually, there are online mindfulness courses now. Exactly for this reason, also people who are maybe in like deep Alaska and they're not next to anything, but why shouldn't they have mindfulness skills? Or even cognitive behavioral therapy. Just because they live far away, they should still have access. So, yeah, it's often tricky to bring somebody, how do you get somebody in the door? But again, it may not be the best thing, but mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy definitely have been shown to reduce intensity of rumination. Rumination is a risk factor for major depression. When you are depressed, rumination exacerbates or maintains and also predicts relapse. So rumination, intense rumination is it's worth reducing. Yeah. Somebody.
Am I right that they've tried this with prison populations?
Yes.
Very successfully?
Have they tried this, meaning I guess different kinds of meditation trainings in prison populations? Yes. Alan Marlott, he died just recently. Superstar, another great guru hero of clinical psychology, clinical science. He did this tremendous work in prisons in Seattle with mindfulness-based mindfulness and vipassana in prisons. And you think about it, I mean, just like right now, basically, like we're free. You can walk out the door, we can do whatever we want. Imagine being locked up. I can't even imagine that. And being surrounded by hostility and anger and shame and hurt 24/7. And to then have an opportunity to go to the gym and just sit and meditate and relinquish some of that self-hatred and other hatred. So that can be super powerful. There's also a whole other side, which is that imagine you're the warden of a prison. You mean you're going to take 30 of my guys and have them sit in silence for 10 days and not bother anybody? And not get into fights? And be quiet and still? And you don't have to pay for that? Oh my gosh, there's no medication or tools? That's pretty amazing. That's actually something that as prison populations and wardens become more open, it's a great tool. It's already being done in India, and there's several good films. The chief of police, former chief of police in New Delhi, forgetting the film, there's a whole movie about how she got thousands of prisoners in prisons outside of New Delhi. And then also there's the Dama brothers about the Alabama prison where I'm doing the research. Yeah, doing time. Yeah. So yes, these can be incredibly, helpful. Yeah. Okay.
I'm wondering about emotional regulation.
Yep.
And avoiding. So I want to understand more. Is it to then feel what you're experiencing? For instance, as an example, if there's violence, like the picture you showed there about Iraq and the prison, if you're hit with that again and again, don't you naturally try to protect yourself? And so I want to understand what you're saying. Is it good to let that, to not avoid it and to completely experience it, but keep your mind on the present and tell it? How is that therapeutic and helpful?
And this will be your last answer. So
Okay, it's a big question. The picture of the female U.S. soldier holding a human being like an animal on a leash, and the whole idea of emotion regulation, and that I mentioned that part of this we often avoid, and that part of it might be avoiding, which means leaning in as opposed to shutting off, becoming numb. But on the other hand, when you're faced with a lot of stuff, it is protective to shut off. So context is important. Think of therapists who are sitting with, be it soldiers or just civilians who have trauma every day. They need a lot of help in regulating their emotions. So this comes back actually to empathy. Empathic concern for others. Empathy, we have modules in the brain that allow me to develop a sense of what you're feeling and what the world is like from your shoes. Cognitive perspective taking and even physical, visceral, emotional sense of what you feel. Plus the clear recognition that that's your emotion. That's your reality. I'm here. I can resonate, sympathize, even feel a little bit. But if I don't have the clear boundary, then you have empathy fatigue. There's no such thing as compassion fatigue, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Empathy fatigue. And so actually we're doing a study. We just got the money from the Army, from the military, to do a study of medics and chaplains who are sent all over the places. And what do? They sit with people who've got their chest blown out, lost their buddy, boo, 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 boo. And I've spent lots of time working in the VAs, so I can feel it. But so because it's empathy, the ability and the clarity. This is where actually it's empathy and the wisdom, clarity, insight. Even though I can feel it, it's yours. I'm a therapist. I can cry. I can feel what you're feeling. I can feel the couples who are separating, divorcing, or angry, or just fundamentally with each other. But that's not me. That's the part. That last part is where you lose it, and you lose your clarity. And then compassion is the wish that is the recognition that others are suffering in many different ways, and the wish or the intention that they come into contact with whatever they need to be well. Love is the wish that others, that others are well. Compassion is that others learn what to do to reduce and remove the root of their suffering. So there's compassion by definition. If you are in a state of compassion, it can be like an ongoing flow. Empathy, without the clarity that I can feel, but it's not me, that's yours. I have my own feelings. Without that clarity, I get sucked in and you lose it. And you burn out. It's a little subtle, but those are important distinctions. We have to stop here? Or?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.